Today you're going to learn how to separate your dreadlocks and also see the benefits from it. Separating your dreadlocks is extremely crucial for creating 1, skinnier dreadlocks, and 2, more dreadlocks. And those go hand in hand. Skinny dreadlocks makes more dreadlocks and more dreadlocks make skinny dreadlocks. And the other way around. If you make thicker dreadlocks, you're going to have less. And of course, if you make less sections, you're going to have thicker dreadlocks. But having more dreadlocks makes it easier for doing hairstyles, and it also makes the hairstyles look a whole lot better. Now, of course, it's a little bit more work, but it's definitely worth it in the long run. When should you consider separating your dreadlocks? I would suggest making that decision as soon as possible, even if that means doing it today. And the reason I say that is because the more your hair matures, the harder it is for the hair to actually be separated. During this entire video, I didn't have to pull out any scissors, and that's because my hair wasn't fully mature yet. Of course, I've had my dreadlocks in for over 6 months, but they still have a lot of maturing to do. And this also doesn't mean that if you've had your hair for over a year or even over 6 months, doesn't mean that you can't separate your dreadlocks. It just takes a little bit more time and effort. And of course, if you had to use scissors, you can use the same process, just with scissors instead of fingers. But you always want to start with separation from the root, because creating your sections is the most important part. You never want to separate the dreadlock from the tip to the root, because you're going to have an uneven section and you're not going to be pleased with the results. So always start from the roots. So first things first, figure out how many dreadlocks you can separate into. And typically you will separate 1 dreadlock into 2, but there are some of the dreadlocks that I'm working with today that I'm separating into 4. And if all your dreadlocks are the same size, then you'll most likely separate them all into the same sections. So if you have big sections, you can possibly even separate all of your dreadlocks into 4, literally quadrupling the amount of your dreadlocks and dividing the size of your dreadlocks by 4. So in the end, you're going to have skinnier dreadlocks and more of them. But with separating from the root, all you do is you create your section at the bottom and you want to pull towards the scalp. Don't ever pull away from the scalp, because you don't want to pull any hair out of it. If you feel any tension at the roots, then you're doing it incorrectly. You always want to keep the tension towards the tip as you're separating. If this begins to hurt, I would encourage you to take a break and also consider someone else assisting you along the way. And of course, there are going to be those that are extremely hard to pull apart, but with a little bit of tension and pressure, you can get them done. And keep in mind that the back of the head and the sides of the head are going to be the most tough areas. And I actually avoided some of the areas like around my neck or above my ears, just because that area of the scalp is mostly sensitive, and I may eventually in the long run end up cutting off those dreadlocks to turn them into a taper fade. So I kept them as is. So you really have to choose your battles wisely when it comes to this. Of course, you can separate them if you would like to. I really could have done them, but I didn't want to put in any extra work that I didn't have to do. And a great tip is that once you start the separation and you feel it starting to separate, that's when it becomes a little easier. It's usually that initial lock that is the hardest to come through. But once you're through that, it's pretty easy along the way. And keep in mind, if the dreadlocks separate unevenly, it's okay. As long as your sections are equal, then you're going to be just fine. And you should know this as well. While separating, one of the dreadlocks might end up a little bit longer than the other one, and that's completely fine as well. And it's natural. The only reason the other one's a little bit longer is because more of the hair went into that one. And it's not hair that's necessarily attached to the scalp. It's just hair that was broken off over time and is now just hanging out in the lock. So it's nothing to worry about. But separation is definitely worth it. And if you're considering it, I would encourage you to do it. All it takes is a little bit of time and effort, and you're going to have some amazing results in the end. And remember, guys, stay patient.